So as we go through rational numbers, one of the first things we're going to look at is adding and subtracting positive and negative decimals. Now, it's important to understand that we add or subtract positive or negative decimals, that we are applying actually two sets of rules. We're going to be using the rules for addition or subtraction of integers, and we will do that first to decide on whether or not we're adding or subtracting. Then we're going to use those decimal rules that we've learned in the past for the actual addition or subtraction. And then at the end there, we need to make sure that we decide if it's the final answer is positive or negative, and we're going to go back to using those integer rules. So let's do some examples. Okay, our first one here, we've got positive 1.5 plus positive 1.54. Now, both of these are positive. You know that you're simply going to add these. But let's not forget our rule that when we add decimals, that we stack the decimals on top of each other. So I'll have 5.1 plus 1.954. When I do this, I need to put in a couple of placeholders here. So then I'm just going to add as normal. It's important, again, that those decimals are stacked on top of each other. So I've got 0 plus 4 is 4, 0 plus 5 is 5, 1 plus 9 is 10, carry the 1, 1 plus 5 plus 1 is 7, drop that decimal straight down. I've got 7.054, and of course both of those were positive to begin with. My final answer is positive 7.0. Next, we're going to add two negatives. We're adding negatives, and whenever I add or subtract, I'm going to sing my song. If the signs are the same, find the sum. So here we are. The signs are the same, so I'm finding the sum. So I know that when I add, again, I simply stack those decimals on top of each other. 2.02, 3.7. I'm going to put a placeholder in right below the 2, and I am adding these. 2 plus 0 is 2, 0 plus 7 is 7, 2 plus 3 is 5. Whoops, let's make sure that looks like a 5. And drop the decimal straight down. I've got 5.72. And now I know that I would have been looking at the larger absolute value, but in this case they are both negative, so my final answer is negative 5.72. Okay, moving right along here, I now have negative 1.41 plus negative 6.3. The signs are the same, find the sum. They're not the same. If the signs are different, find the difference. Here I am, my signs are different, and I'm going to be finding the difference of those absolute values. Now, I know that the larger absolute value, of course, is going to be this one, with my positive 6.3, so I'm just going to automatically put that on top. 6.3. I am finding the difference, let's not forget. 6.3 minus 1.41. Stacking those decimals right on top of each other. I need a placeholder because there's a different number of decimal places. I can't take 1 away from 0. Be careful here. I know that some of you be inclined to take 0 away from 1. That's not what we're doing here. We're taking 1 away from 0, which means we need to borrow from the 3. That becomes a 2. My 1 becomes a 10. Because remember, I'm borrowing from the tenths there. So 10 minus 1 is 9. 2 minus 4. Again, I can't do that. I need to borrow from the 6. 6 becomes 5. 2 becomes 12. 12 minus 4 is 8. 5 minus 1 is 4. Drop my decimal straight down. It's 4.89. Now I just need to decide what the sign is. Again, this has got the larger absolute value, so my sign is going to be positive. Positive 4.89. My next problem, I've got positive 5.7 plus negative 12.25. Sing your song. If the signs are the same, find the sum. If the signs are different, find the difference. I'm finding the difference here. I need to take my absolute values. I know the absolute value of negative 12.25 is 12.25. It is going to be the larger of the two absolute values. I'm finding the difference, so I'm going to be subtracting 5.7 from that. I'm going to put a placeholder in. I've got 5 minus 0 is 5. 2 minus 7, I can't do that, so I'm going to borrow from the 2. It's going to become a 1. This 2 becomes 12. 12 minus 7 is 5. And then I've got 11 here. You might look at that as a 1 minus 5, but because it's just these two numbers, I know that's 11 minus 5 is 6. Drop my decimal straight down. The sign of my answer will be that of the larger absolute value. Right here, this tells me it's going to be negative. So my answer is negative 6.55. That is my final answer. So those are all the different types of addition problems that we'll run into using our decimals. So now let's look at some subtraction problems. So the first of these subtraction problems, I've got positive 5.1 minus positive 1.95. So this is just your regular decimal subtraction, but we want to make sure we remember how to do this. I need to stack those decimals on top of each other. 5.1 minus 1.954. And yes, I am using the same exact numbers that I used in the previous slide. I'm just using them as subtraction problems now, so you can compare those at the end. I need two placeholders. I can't take 4 away from 0, so I need to borrow from the previous number. I can't take it from 0, so I need to go back to the 1. The 1's going to become a 0. This 0 becomes 10. Remember, the whole purpose for doing that was to borrow from it, so I am going to borrow from the 10. That's going to become a 9, and my final 0 here becomes a 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. 9 minus 5 is 4. I can't take 9 away from 0, so I'm going to borrow from the 5. That becomes a 4. This 0 becomes a 10. Minus 9 is 1. 4 minus 1 is 1. Drop that decimal straight down. I take the absolute values and I decide which one is larger. But in this case, they're both positive, so my final answer is going to be positive. Positive 1.146. Now, let's take a look at this next problem here. I am subtracting. The last one, I just did a straight out subtraction problem because it was, the numbers were both positive. But in this one, I am going to stay, change, cha-cha-cha. Don't forget that. And now I'm going to pretend this wasn't here, and I'm going to find the absolute values of these so that I can do my addition problem. I'm going to sing, if the signs are the same, find the sum. If the signs are different, find the difference. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm finding the difference because these signs in my new problem are different. So the larger of those two absolute values, of course, is going to be 3.7. So I'm going to have 3.7 minus 2.02. I'm going to need to put a placeholder in here. I can't take 2 away from 0, so I'm going to borrow from the 7. It becomes a 6. 10 minus 2 is 8. 6 minus 0 is 6. 3 minus 2 is 1. Drop down my decimal. I look at these two. I look at negative 2.02 and positive 3.7. The larger of those absolute values is positive 3.7. So my answer is positive 1.68. Okay, so our next problems that we have here, I didn't quite mean to do that. I apologize for making your eyes probably look a little buggy there. Okay, I'm subtracting, so I'm going to stay, change, change, cha-cha-cha. And then I sing my song. If the signs are the same, find the sum. I'm finding the sum here. Absolute values of both of them. Absolute value of negative 1.4 is 1.4. Absolute value of negative 6.3 is 6.3. I've stacked my decimals on top of each other. I'm now going to simply add. 4 plus 3 is 7. 1 plus 6 is 7. Drop my decimal down. And, oh goodness, I just realized that I forgot when I brought this down there's a 1 there, which means there's a 1 here. We're very lucky that that didn't really mess up our problem here. It is 7.71. I do apologize for those of you that confused. But remember, I just add straight down, so it would have been 1 plus 0 is 1, 4 plus 3 is 7, 1 plus 6 is 7. Drop down the decimal, I've got 7.71. I take the sign from the larger absolute value, but here, remember we're looking at the addition problem, not the original subtraction problem. I find that my answer will be negative. Positive 5.7 minus negative 12.5. So I'm going to stay, change, change, cha-cha-cha. It's also fun to cha-cha-cha, let's be honest. And then I sing my song. If the signs are the same, find the sum. And look at that, they are the same. I'm finding the sum. So I've got 5.7 plus 12.25. I am going to put a placeholder in here. 0 plus 5 is 5. 7 plus 2 is 9. 5 plus 2 is 7. Bring down that 1. Bring down the decimal. They are both positive. My answer is positive 17.95. So here you can see how we combine those rules of the addition and subtraction of positive and negative numbers and apply it to decimals as well. So while I thought that we had finished all of these, I found out today, thanks to one of your peers, that I did make an error on here. The funny thing is I hadn't made an error on my work paper that I had done before this, but then when I did it on here I did. So hopefully you already figured out that this one had an error. And the error wasn't actually until the very end, right here. Because 4 take away 1 is certainly not 1. It really should be 3. So the answer is positive 3.146.